The big story of the day is that FBI Director Christopher Wray was called into Congress, hauled in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee because the country still has questions. We're coming up on about 2 months, just about 4 days away from 2 months out from the January 6th Capitol Hill riots, or the protest, the seditionist, insurrectionist debacle, whatever you want to call it. It's been 2 months. And we still don't have a lot of answers. We still don't know how Officer Brian Sicknick died. We still don't know exactly what the government's response to this is going to be. Are we going to hear more murmuring about, domestic surveillance or domestic terrorism or insurgency tactics to come and deal with this massive problem that they're telling us exists? And so he was hauled in front of Congress today. Christopher Wray, I'm talking about, the person who is in charge of all of this. He's the FBI director, the executive agency that's responsible for domestic law enforcement, that funnels cases over to the U.S. Attorney's Office, that is part of the executive branch under the supervision of the Department of Justice. This guy should have answers more than anybody does. And so we're all kind of excited about this, saying, hey, great, he's coming into Congress. Maybe he'll be able to shed some light on what is going on, but not so much. This story comes over from NBCnews.com. It says here, Christopher Wray sheds little new light on domestic terror, Capitol riot intel failures. Prior to the riot, Wray said the FBI tracked a large amount of information about potential violence, but he didn't explain what the FBI did with it. So they tracked a large amount of info before January 6th, but he didn't tell him what they did with it. People were asking him about it in Congress, and he didn't explain what they did with it. Yeah, we got a lot of information, but what do we do with it? Well, I don't know. We're going to see a lot of that type of language. His appearance before the Senate Judiciary Committee today was his first public testimony since September and the first formal statement from the FBI about the status of the riot investigation. So 2 months, first formal statement we're getting out of this guy, one of the most expansive in its history. 2 months. It was also his first opportunity to discuss why the FBI did not detect in advance what it now says in court documents was extensive plotting and planning known extremist groups that attacked the Capitol in a coordinated fashion. Senators have largely avoided asking him specific questions about that. So why is that? So why are these senators not asking about it? Kind of an important question. Sounds like prior to January 6th, or I would say even after January 6th, the story that we heard throughout the media was that Donald Trump caused this. He was inciting insurrection. That was the whole basis of the impeachment trial that we went through. Spent a lot of time on that, a lot of political resource and capital and all sorts of news attentions and news cycles. We're just diving into this impeachment, which all stemmed from Donald Trump's speech at Save America rally on January 6th, where he said something that they didn't like. And they're sort of trying to tar him with all of the fallout from the Capitol Hill riots, which I never thought was fair. And so the idea was that this was all just spontaneous. Oh my gosh, this all happened out of the blue. Nobody knew. Donald Trump incited it. That's how we can blame him. But then as soon as he wasn't impeached, the story transitioned a little bit. Now the law enforcement agencies who were responsible for Capitol Hill security, now they're saying, even in court documents, according to this article, that there was extensive planning and plotting by known extremist groups. And according to Christopher Wray on this clip, on this slide, he says there was a large amount of information that was gathered, but yet again, nobody knows what they did with it. Nobody knows what happened here. Why was the security failure so massive and so systemic? It went from the Sergeant at Arms over at the House of Representatives to the Senate, to the Capitol Hill Police, to the Metro Police, to the National Guard people, now to the FBI. Nobody knows what the hell happened, and they're all still trying to piece it together. They haul him in front of Congress, and we're going to see a lot of non-answers from him. So here is a clip. We do know that he is categorizing this in one particular way. He's saying that this is now domestic terrorism, which causes somebody like me, who is sort of a civil libertarian-ish type of person, who knows what powers the governments took in their initial response to terrorism after 9/11, and they were already using that here on people in the United States. That's what we learned from Edward Snowden. That's what we learned from Julian Assange and others. A lot of those have been rolled back. A lot of those sort of overstepping of surveillance boundaries have been rolled back a little bit, but the point here is that the government was doing these things under the guise of domestic security, national security, Department of Homeland Security, all in the sake of combating terrorism. Now, they're saying that terrorism is not even abroad anymore. It's right here in the United States. So what are the security implications for that for the everyday citizen? What does that mean for you and your domestic privacy rights or your civil rights as an American citizen? Well, we don't know, but we do know that Christopher Wray is categorizing what we saw on January 6th as domestic terrorism. We're still going to learn and glean what that means. What are the consequences of this categorization? Here he is earlier today in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Let me start with a quick update on the investigation into the January 6th attack here at the Capitol. I was appalled, like you, at the violence and destruction that we saw that day. I was appalled that you, our country's elected leaders, were victimized right here in these very halls. That attack, that siege, was criminal behavior, plain and simple, and it's behavior that we, the FBI, view as domestic terrorism. It's got no place in our democracy, and tolerating it would make a mockery of our nation's rule of law. Citizens from around the country have sent us more than 270,000 digital media tips. Some have even taken the painful step of turning in their friends or their family members. But with their help, we've identified hundreds of suspects and opened hundreds of investigations in all but one of our 56 field offices.
I'd like to ask you, Director Wray, do you agree that the Capitol attack involved white supremacists and other violent extremists?
Certainly, the Capitol attack involved violent extremists. As I said, we, the FBI, consider this a form of domestic terrorism. So we've got a number who self-identify with, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, things like that. We also have a couple of instances where we've already identified individuals involved in the criminal behavior who we would put in the racially motivated violent extremists who advocate for what you would call sort of white supremacy. So there have been some of those individuals as well.
Based on your investigation so far, do you have any evidence that the Capitol attack was organized by, quote, fake Trump protesters?
We have not seen evidence of that at this stage, certainly.
Thank you. Senator Grassley.
Yeah. All right, so that's kind of the big headline that's poking around a lot of the mainstream news sites. You'll see that FBI Director Wray comes out and confirms that Antifa wasn't involved in this at all because of that last little snippet there where he said, no, we haven't seen any evidence of these fake Trump supporters. So, largely I agree with him on some of those points, the ones in the middle that he makes where he's saying, well, Americans are responding to this. We've got a lot of investigations open. We're doing our due diligence, and we're seeing a lot of these cases progress criminally speaking. We're prosecuting these as crimes, which I agree with. I think they should be prosecuted as crimes. I've been consistent about that. I've said that repeatedly on this show. I don't think that anybody should sort of escape justice for this because of a political disposition, right? I was critical of the allegation here back when this happened that the white police officers were letting all of the white Trump supporters go free. I thought that was undermining the truth, number one, but also the legitimacy of the justice system. And we knew that wasn't going to be the case, that they weren't just going to go by the wayside. And the story has unfolded much in the same way that I predicted. The FBI is around the country, around the world, sweeping up individuals, processing thousands, hundreds of thousands potentially of images and videos. And you said, and you just heard him say in every single state office, they've got people working on this stuff. Massive, massive investigation. Anybody who is being prosecuted or has been identified should be prosecuted, because if they're not, the other side is going to use that as a bludgeon to do Lord knows what with it. And so I'm not going to go down that road or down that rabbit hole. But the point here is they're crimes. They were crimes. They committed crimes. But we're seeing this modification of just standard criminal law in the United States, for which we have a lot of procedure. We've got case law, we've got Supreme Courts, we've got a framework and a hierarchy on how these cases are processed. And now they're sort of categorizing it a little bit differently. That a lot of these people are just, even the people who maybe just walked into the Capitol building after the fact, who, I'm just part of the tour defense, are those domestic terrorists, or what are we talking about? How are we going to define this? Because it's a little bit of a different category, which in my mind unveils or allows the government to pursue alternative enforcement mechanisms and sort of bend the rules of the Constitution and due process and those different sort of civil right protections that you have to be free from an over-encroaching law enforcement agency. And the reason why this sort of sticks out so badly to me is we've already heard from John Brennan, the former CIA director, who said that libertarians are now sort of in this category. We've also heard from Jen Psaki, the press secretary over at the White House, talking about domestic violence extremism, and they're creating these new categories for, we don't know who yet. We don't really know who they're going to throw in here, who's going to end up in this bucket, but it is becoming more and more prevalent. And when I heard Christopher Wray today speak in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, it reminded me of an article that I had clipped a while back, and it was 1 month old today, posted over at NPR from Mary Louise Kelly. We may have covered it on the show, or I don't know if we just synced it or I just clipped it, but February 2nd, she posted this. Former CIA officer says, treat domestic extremism as an insurgency. Well, what does that mean? When it comes to domestic extremists, such as those who stormed the Capitol, a longtime CIA officer argues the U.S. should treat them as an insurgency. That means using counterinsurgency tactics, similar in some ways to those used in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The guy's name is Robert Grenier, served in the CIA station chief for Pakistan and Afghanistan. He says, we may be witnessing the dawn of a sustained wave of violent insurgency within our own country, perpetrated by our own countrymen. And without national action, he argues, extremists who seek a social apocalypse are capable of producing endemic political violence of the sort not seen in this country since Reconstruction. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of this language being floating around. You know, he's claiming we need national action. What does that mean? What is Christopher Wray talking about when he says this is domestic terrorism? Does that give them any additional privileges that, as a law enforcement agency, any abilities to do an end run around, I don't know, the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure rules, your ability to be free from government intrusion in your homes or in your areas where you have a reasonableness, an expectation of privacy? Where is this going? Well, we don't know. I mean, it's a lot of colorful language flying back and forth, but when they start categorizing people in this manner, typically means that there's something further coming down the pike. We don't know what it is yet, and Christopher Wray didn't really tell us much about what that is. What is domestic terror? What does that mean for the FBI? Does that mean you're going to be looking into all of this and you're going to have answers when we ask you questions about this? So presumably, this is the biggest problem that this country has had in a long time, you know, other than of course, coronavirus, but in terms of sort of domestic political activity, Capitol Hill, that kind of takes the cake on this thing. So you would imagine that the FBI director, the person who's in charge of all of this, not new, has carried over from the Trump administration and has previous experience in government. He's been around for a long time. You would guess that he has answers to some of the most important questions, and he's willing to share that with this country. Like, I don't know, for example, how did Officer Sicknick die? Here's a clip on that.
I want to know what happened to Officer Brian Sicknick. Tragic death as a result of that January 6th assault. There's been conflicting reports about his cause of death. Have you determined the exact cause of death? And is there a homicide investigation?
So I'll take the last part of your question first. There is an ongoing investigation into his death. I have to be careful at this age, because it's ongoing, not to get out in front of it. But I certainly understand and respect and appreciate the keen interest in what happened to him. After all, he was here protecting all of you. And as soon as there's information that we can appropriately share, we want to be able to do that. But at the moment, the investigation is still ongoing.
So does that mean, since the investigation is going on, you have not determined the exact cause of the death?
That means we can't yet disclose a cause of death at this stage.
But you have determined the cause of death.
I didn't say that. We're not at a point where we can disclose or confirm a cause of death.
Nothing, no answer, total non-response. This was one of the biggest foundational pieces of the entire narrative of the Capitol Hill riots. Remember, immediately, there were allegations in the media. New York Times ran with it. We clipped it and played it on the show, where they were saying that he got hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, had a gash on his face, on his head, was transported to the hospital and died immediately, or died shortly thereafter, within the 24 hours. None of that was true. None of it was true. Texted his brother, talked to the mom. Everybody, sort of said, oh, he may have got hit with bear spray, and then suddenly he had to be transported to the hospital and he died. Tragic death. So sorry that he's lost. Rest in peace. May his family be at peace at some point in the future, but they're going to need some closure here. They're going to want to know, how did he die? Is their son being used as a political prop? It certainly seems like that to me, which is disgusting, reprehensible behavior. But remember, this was the foundational lie. New York Times ran with it. Everybody picked it up, and it was spread all over the place that Trump supporters murdered a police officer. It made it into the impeachment memorandum, not the article of impeachment, which was filed shortly thereafter, I think January 13th. After they had time to think about this was a line item, a bullet point in the Democrats' not the article of impeachment. That was a small 4 or 5 page document. In their big 85-page document, MAGA maniacs murdered Sicknick. I mean, that was one of the key points that justified the entire impeachment proceeding. So now, still today, 2 months later, we still don't know how he died. No idea. And the FBI director, person in charge of the entire investigation for the federal government, comes in front of Congress, in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and can't even shed light on that. Why is that? Well, the Washington Examiner a few days ago was trying to dive into it, and they found some more information. They said the FBI narrows the focus to chemical spray, and specifically a chemical spray video in the death of Officer Sicknick. The FBI reportedly suspects U.S. Capitol Police officer's death is related to some type of chemical irritant after ruling out that he died from blunt force trauma. So it was not the fire extinguisher. Capitol Police say Sicknick died the day after January 6th in connection to which prosecutors have charged more than 300 people. Investigators that are a part of the FBI homicide inquiry have uncovered video footage of Sicknick and other officers being attacked with bear spray that day, and they have pinpointed one person of interest, although they have not yet identified the individual, the New York Times reported. The assailant was captured on video talking about attacking officers with bear spray. A law enforcement official told the outlet both the FBI and Justice Department declined to comment on the matter. Investigators initially suspected that Sicknick, a 42-year-old Air National Guard veteran, had been hit in the head by one of the rioters with a fire extinguisher, although officials now say that Sicknick's body showed no signs of blunt force trauma. So the Washington Examiner is telling us a little bit more about it. Apparently they've identified some people who were bragging about hitting the police with bear spray, and maybe that killed Officer Sicknick. We don't know. Presumably, they know. They did an autopsy. He's already been cremated. There's nothing else to look into. The body is gone. He's not with us anymore. He's been cremated. He had a ceremony at the Capitol building, and he's now interred somewhere. And that is not the end of the story. People want to know, how did he die? Because this was the basis of a lot of the narrative that we've been just living in for a long period of time. And it's important, I think, that we know what's going on here in order to determine the validity of the prior reporting, which we all know is garbage. So what's the point, I guess? U.S. State Capitol Police, they have another statement, February 26th. They say the medical examiner's report on Sicknick's death, which followed the attack on Capitol 6, is not yet complete. All right. We are awaiting toxicology results and continue to work with other government agencies regarding the death investigation. Officer Sicknick's family has asked for privacy during this time, which we want to respect. And that the spreading of misinformation stop regarding the cause of death. Well, you could help us with that, okay? You could help us. The department and the Sicknick family appreciate the outpouring of support for our fallen officer. And so I understand toxicology results. I understand that sometimes these things take time, because they do take time. In fact, typically what they'll do is they'll use a machine called gas chromatography machine, GCMS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry. And that can take time. In a regular case, in a regular DUI case where somebody, maybe they didn't test positive for alcohol, those results come back fairly quickly. But if they have to do a drug analysis, the way that it works is they first want to identify potentially what is in the blood. So think about this differently. If somebody has alcohol in their system, you can pretty much see it. You can smell it. You know it's alcohol. You draw their blood. You test for alcohol. If it's a different drug, it could be one of a dozen drugs. You have no idea. A lot of the drugs can show some of the same signs and symptoms. Some will show aggression or energy. Some will be downers, some will be uppers. And so if you have a case like that and you have to identify sort of this weird potential concoction of a variety of different drugs, then that can take longer because they're testing for multiple different drugs. So the question would be here, did they do that initial screen? Did they identify? Did they rule out any drugs? Did they say that this was not, an overdose? This was not a suicide. This has nothing to do with anything that came from over the counter. Was there evidence that there was bear spray in his blood? They could give us more information about it. I think 2 months is too long for this. I think they should have gotten this back a lot sooner. And I know that they're going to use this toxicology report, but this is the country. And I've got a lot of criticism when law enforcement does this just across the board. I think that when police delay the results, or when they delay communicating about the results or about anything, when they don't issue a statement just in general. Last week we talked about Angelo Quinto, and it was 30 days or maybe longer than that, 2 months since that young man was killed by the police, and no statements from them over in Antioch, I believe that was. No statements from them. Why are they not speaking out? Why? Because the investigation's ongoing? Well, we know what happens these days when we don't get communicated with. People don't like it, and it's not okay. The default here should be transparency. If the investigation is ongoing, that's fine and well, but they can start correcting the narrative right now. They could have started correcting the narrative a long time ago, but they allowed it to just continue. Why is that? Why are they not giving us more answers about any of this stuff? It's been 2 months. Toxicology report should be back by now. Okay, this is one of the most serious homicides in this entire country. We've already seen this, and they've come out and they've clarified that. They said, yes, the FBI is involved. The entire U.S. Attorney's Office is involved. We have Capitol Hill Police, the Metro Police. Every single person is involved in this, basically, that we can think of. And they're just, it's just toxicology. Well, somebody call the toxicology lab and say, hey, Lou, get up, go run that vial. Let me know what the results say, because the country wants to know an answer to this question. And it's not just the country. It's not just me kind of bitching about this on YouTube, content warning, but it's also his mom, 74-year-old Gladys Sicknick, says he wasn't hit on the head. No, we think he had a stroke, but we don't know anything for sure. She said, we'd love to know what happened. She's said earlier this week she's still waiting to hear more about her son's death. She thinks he might have suffered a stroke. So 74-year-old Gladys is also wondering what is going on, and the government, for some reason, probably political BS, has said that, we don't know. The investigation is ongoing. How about you get to it then? Because there's a lot you don't know here, Christopher Wray. Wray, according to the New York Post, says pleads ignorance on domestic surveillance used by the FBI after the Capitol riot. So again, you're going to see here a lot of I don't knows, a lot of, we have to look into it. I got to coordinate with my other teams and all this garbage. It's been 2 months. This is the person who's in charge of the entire bureau. Why doesn't he not have more answers? Did he know? Did somebody give him the memo today that he was going to be appearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and he better have some answers? Or did somebody just kind of pull him out of the restroom? Hey, Chris, they're having a hearing in there. You're late. Get over here. Oh, I'm not prepared. I don't have my briefcase. Go get my briefcase because all my answers are in there. Did he forget his briefcase? Here this goes. He said Tuesday he wasn't aware of whether subordinates are pursuing controversial domestic surveillance steps to track down participants in the January 6th Capitol riot. He wasn't aware. Not that they are or they aren't. I'm not aware of whether subordinates are pursuing controversial domestic surveillance steps to track down participants. Just wasn't aware. Can you say yes or no? No, I'm not aware of that. So can you tell me definitively, in the FBI, have you given any orders that say, maybe don't do those things that are more controversial? Do you have a position on that? I'm not aware of that. All right. Okay, that's fine. Let's continue on, Chris. Chris told senators during a Judiciary Committee hearing that he didn't know if FBI agents acquired large quantities of transaction records from Bank of America, as reported by Fox News, or if the FBI used geolocation data from a cell phone tower that dumps ID to attendees, as reported by The Intercept. So the FBI doesn't know about it, but Fox News knows about it. They know that the FBI used bank records from Bank of America. Fox figured it out. Christopher Wray couldn't do it. And The Intercept figured out that the FBI was using geolocation data from cell phone tower to take identification numbers from the people who were in the vicinity and match them to their persona. Christopher Wray didn't know about it, but The Intercept sure as hell did. They figured it out pretty quick. Senator Mike Lee from Utah and Josh Hawley, they pressed Wray for information on cell phone geolocation data, which raises legal concerns, especially because members of Congress and journalists were in the Capitol at the same time as the rioters. Okay, so you're not just capturing data from the MAGA people, you're also capturing it from Congress people, other security personnel. What if somebody who is monitoring these logs, or somebody who's, an intern at the FBI just kind of combing through Excel spreadsheets, sees some data from a top secret confidential communication from one person to another person that jeopardizes national security, and this goes, haywire, hypothetically? What's going on? This is kind of important stuff, and Christopher Wray doesn't have any answers for it. So Mike Lee says, quote, is the FBI accessing cell phone tower metadata from telecommunications company? Is that where it's coming from? Christopher Wray says, well, without knowing the specifics, without being able to drill into the specifics, it's hard for me to answer your question. Okay, so Lee says, all right, so let me clarify this for you there, Chris. Are there instances in which you're interviewing people based solely on information derived from a telecommunications provider providing geolocation information indicating that they were on or near the National Mall on January 6th? Okay, that sounds like a pretty specific question. Big, long sentence, very clear about what he's asking. Wray said that because the investigation is so large, quote, it's very hard for me to speak with any absolute confidence as to whether there's any interview predicated on any one specific thing. So not answer at all. Hawley later pressed Wray for an answer on, quote, whether or not the Bureau has scooped up geolocation data, metadata from cell phone records or cell phone towers. FBI says, I would not be surprised to learn, but I do not know for a fact that we were using geolocation data under any situation with connection with the investigation of January 6th. Non-answer. I do not know. Hawley pressed again on the allegations of Bank of America. Critics call it a fishing expedition to search for incriminating information. Wray says, I don't know any of the specifics. I'd have to look into that. Hawley asked if there were similar records were taken from other banks. Wray again said, didn't know. All right, so lots of didn't knows, just had no idea. If somebody was if this was somebody who worked here at this office, and let's say I put them in charge of one entire department, and I said, you need to know what's going on in your department at all times. If there are major issues, if stuff bubbles up and you've identified this as a problem, or sort of the people you're in charge of, if somebody's identified this as a problem, yeah, it's in your wheelhouse. You got to know about it. You have to be in control. You are the leader of that department, right? Something bad happens. I call them into my office. Hey, what happened here? I don't know. Okay, well, how about we just investigate that a little bit further? Can you tell me what happened here? Well, not with the specifics on that. I mean, that's a very important question. Well, I know it's an important question because this is an important issue. Maybe you should answer that. Maybe you should go and figure that out. Otherwise, maybe we should find somebody who actually has the answers, because Christopher Wray certainly does not. And it's shameful. Now, my hypothetical maybe doesn't hold water with you, because the converse here is he doesn't work for them. He works for the executive branch. He works for Joe Biden. He works for the Department of Justice. That's his administration. He works with them. So maybe he walks right into the Senate Judiciary Committee and he says, okay, idiots, what are you going to do about it? I don't have to tell you anything. Which is the same routine that we see very periodically out of Congress. Haul the big tech people in, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Sundar over at Google. Everybody comes in, no answers, nothing. It's a political show. It's a whole spectacle. No new answers out of this. Very disappointing. Maybe we should have more of these so that we can get less answers out of them. It's ridiculous. Liberty or death. So we're going to jump over to some questions over from locals.com/watchingthewatchers. If you want to ask a question, head on over there and join up. Liberty or death says, Wray is such a squirrely, squishy guy. He and these senators seem like they discussed and decided on some talking points. A little Donna Brazile and Hillary action. Yeah, it was a little bit frustrating, I would say the least. That's putting it mildly. It was very uneventful today, which is a bummer. Anki Woe says, Wray was somehow able to ramble off a whole bunch of racial diversity stats of his agency, but couldn't remember whether Bank of America offered confidential consumer information to the FBI. Yeah, it's a great point. His vernacular is very good. He's out there talking about white supremacy. He knows the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers. He knows anybody who's in that little, he had no problem explaining that. White supremacy. Yeah, we're all over the white supremacy stuff. I got that covered. Don't worry about it. We're talking about domestic violent extremism. We're talking about domestic terrorism. We're talking about the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and white supremacy. He's got a lock on that topic. But if you ask him about, I don't know, the regular, ordinary course of business, things like, well, did you have a private company literally scraping their customers' data and sending it over to you in violation of their privacy rights? I have no idea. That's a great question, Senator. I have no idea. Wow, that's a good one. How about this? Hey, were you scraping data off of the cell sites that were just gobbling up metadata of everybody who was in there, potentially even Congress people who have higher security clearances than you? Were you doing that? Yes or no? Whoa, that's complicated. It's not appropriate. There's an ongoing investigation, so we're going to have to keep looking into that. Liberty or Death says Antifa is an idea, but January 6th was domestic terrorism. See that? See how this works? The use of that language is not an accident. Can you say Patriot Act 2.0? I totally agree with you, Liberty or Death. I think this is where they're going. I think they're laying a framework for this. It's all going to be done in the name of racial equity, white supremacy, domestic terror, sedition, and on and on and on. We've already seen this before. We've already gone through this. We went back through this in 2001. Sharon Quidney says, I don't believe anything Wray has to say. He's just pushing the party line narrative that white supremacy is the main problem. I also object to the constant linguistic inflation attack, domestic terrorism, insurrection, rebellion, revolt, etc. It's just another one of their deflection tactics to provide cover for things like taking away our rights and the cover up around Sicknick's death, not to mention bombing Iraq. It's a good point, Sharon. I think you hit a lot of good points on that. I don't have much to add to it. I think that it is largely a political tool at this point. They know that it was a horrendous thing, and they're going to get a lot of political momentum out of it. And it's really hard to come out and attack it, right? You can't come out and endorse anything that happened on January 6th. Yeah, that was great. Everybody's overreacting, because if you say that, then now you look like I don't know, a white supremacist, insurrectionist, domestic terrorist. So it's sort of a self-perpetuating claim. If you try to oppose it, well, they just say, well, yeah, see, you hate America. You want to undermine democracy. Arrest that man. Farmer's Daughter says, do you think the FBI needs time to spin it as needed? No, I don't think that they need to spin it, because it probably doesn't serve them. I mean, if this served them, if this was bear spray and they could connect this back to that one individual, they would say, yeah, he murdered that person with bear spray. We already know about that, but we don't. It's probably because it's not good information. They're going to go through a lot of these other, commissions and inquiries. And then at the end of the day, 6 months from now, they'll say, oh, yeah, here's the toxicology report. Yeah, it was a stroke. Yeah, I don't know. He had a high cholesterol. He had a heart attack. Sorry. But the whole country has been operating on the premise that he was murdered by the Capitol Hill rioters, which is just not true. It made it into the Democrats' own documents. Sliding Edge says, thoughts on Wray categorizing January 6th as domestic terrorism? Well, Sliding Edge, I think you may have missed the first part of the show. I'm not happy about it. I don't think that it works well for our country. I do not like the idea that we're using these sort of this language to elevate what, in my opinion, is already a crime. We already have crimes on the book. All this stuff was already criminal. Prosecute them. Fine with that. But when you start saying we're going to call it terrorism, we're going to sort of invoke concepts of insurgency, we're going to start calling libertarians domestic violent extremists, it is categorizing an entirely normal, benign demographic of people in this country who are expressing political opinions as something that they are not. And that is not appropriate in my mind at all. We have Liberty or Death says, I may have missed it, but in these hearings, have any of the senators asked about Ashley Babbitt being shot? Not that I've seen, Liberty or Death. That one has kind of gone by the wayside. That officer, last I heard, was still in hiding. Don't know if that's still true. Don't know anything about that officer. Don't know if they even intend to tell us what happened there, or if there's going to be any formal use of force investigation into any of that. I think we just got to get used to this. We have Jeremy Matrita says, withholding information only confirms what everyone knows is thinking. They only make themselves look incompetent by not answering the question truthfully. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Jeremy, but I just don't know. I think they probably know that. I mean, there's only a certain, most of the population is not as engaged as I am or as you are, right? We sort of live in this world, but most of the population, they're reading tech blogs, they're looking at makeup magazines, they're looking at, sports and all of that stuff, which is all great. That's fine, right? Not everybody should be involved in politics because it's exhausting sometimes. But my point here is that, a lot of the time what I think these hearings are intending to do is it's just going down the checklist, just checking the box. Okay, I appeared in front of Congress, got that one done, got that one done. But they know that time is on their side. And the longer that they can put between having to release information that hurts them and the things that they are trying to get done, the better that is for them. If they want to roll out a lot of this, domestic terrorism framework, whatever that looks like, we're seeing it, the framework being laid right now. We're still early in the Biden administration. I'm sure there are people watching this going, you're a conspiracy theorist. And this is all nonsense. They are laying the tracks down here. We've already been talking about it. Jen Psaki, I think one of the first days that she was in the White House press briefing room, she was talking about this domestic violent extremism, and I marked a pin in it right here on this channel. Now the FBI director is coming out, same stuff, and it's just going to continue to happen on and on and on. And so if they want that agenda to be rolled out, well, they have to be very careful about releasing information that breaks or shatters that narrative. In this case, Officer Sicknick dying of a stroke, like Gladys said, might shatter that narrative. People will go, well, I thought that he was killed by the MAGA people, and he wasn't. So they're just going to continue to delay that, roll out the rest of this stuff, and then they can make the big reveal later down the road once everybody has already acclimated to these big changes that are coming from the new administration. New York Renal MD is in the house. He says, Robert, if there is some bizarre federal murder of civil rights chargers, can the attorneys bring up the fact that there was a systemic false narrative set forth in the media? The potential jury pool now assumes that this officer was murdered. So, good question, Doc. Generally speaking, what you would do is deal with this at voir dire. That's when you are asking the jury questions. And so you would just make sure that the jurors had not heard about this case. In particular, the specifics around Officer Sicknick. I think that we're going to see a lot of that coming up in the upcoming months. They're going to have to find jurors in the Derek Chauvin case that didn't hear about George Floyd. How do you find people that didn't hear about that, didn't see the video, don't know anything about what's going on? They're going to have to go and track those people down, which would be the same case here, right? So if the person who is subject to current investigation, as we said, the Washington Examiner said that the FBI has a person of interest that they've pinpointed. If they charge that person with a crime, he would be able to make those claims that he's already been convicted in the court of public opinion. But any defense attorney who's representing him, the judge would basically say, you can cure this in voir dire. So what if the media already convicted him? You're going to get a bunch of jurors on your panel that have never even heard about the case. They don't even know who he is. They never heard about Capitol Hill, or they heard something about it. They're going to be able to find those people because even though it was one of the most obvious things that was all over the place it still is mostly all over the place. We're still talking about it. They're going to try to weed those people out so they can just get to, blank slate, tabula rasa people. We have Remark 2 says they would not have released Sicknick's body for cremation unless they had determined a cause of death. Yeah, I think that's an astute observation there, Remark 2. And did the family have an opportunity to have a second autopsy? We don't know. We don't know anything because they haven't told us anything. It's been 2 months. No additional toxicology investigations. That means they've already withdrawn the fluids from his bodies. It's already been tested. They can't run a couple extra tests for him 2 months from now? Give me a break. They know exactly what it was. What he's not telling us because the investigation is ongoing. Okay. So if they tell us why he died, what's that going to jeopardize? Or how he died, what is that going to jeopardize? Is the person who killed him now going to start creating an alibi? And if so, then it's a very weak case, right? If they can just come up with something, no, I didn't do that. I didn't have that. I didn't have those things. It's a pretty weak case. We'll see. Liberty or Death says, I have a feeling we will find out exactly what happened to Sicknick around the same time they solve Seth Rich's murder. For those of you not in the know, that means we're not going to figure it out. That's what Liberty or Death is saying. Nobody still knows what happened with Seth Rich. Nobody knows what happened with Sicknick. We'll see if we ever find out. Dr. Renal MD in the house says the Chiron on several MSNBC YouTube page says federal officers are closing in on a suspect in the murder. They quote the New York Times, but they never say murder. The media is creating a false narrative. Well, that's exactly right. They've been doing it since January 7th, really, since that New York Times article. Murdered with a fire extinguisher. Didn't happen. Total lie, fabrication. I understand that in the heat of the moment, but it also made it into the Democrats' impeachment memoranda, and they ran with it, as did the rest of the media. It's very dishonest, totally inappropriate, and it angers me. We have Nadar Blasir says, Chris Wray and his FBI are the real domestic terrorists in this country. Antifa plus BLM causing billions in damage to the government and private property damage all summer long was just a myth, but putting your feet on the sacred desk of Madame Pelosi is the real problem this country is facing. Tyrant. Yeah. It's because it's political, in my opinion, right? They're not concerned about property destruction. They're not concerned about Nancy Pelosi's desk or her laptop being stolen or the podium being ripped out of there. All that gets fixed. There is, the Capitol building's sacred, so it's a little bit of a symbolic insult. It kind of hurts to see that happening in a place that should be revered just for its historical significance. I can't say I revere any single member of Congress today, or haven't for a long time. So that's not what I'm talking about. But a lot of great men and women have gone through there, and it's a sacred place. That's a little bit different. But if you want to just break it down on dollars and cents, literally, it is just the damage from the Capitol building it pales in comparison to the damage that we saw for months, extended months throughout the summer. And no politicians were calling that insurrection. No politicians were calling that domestic terrorism, even though they were throwing Molotov cocktails at a federal court building and they burnt down the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis for the police department. And those are both political institutions. They both enforce political rules. And they were trying to be destroyed. Massive double standard. Jeremy Matrita says, how about a new law that removes 4 laws off the books for every 1 new law? I would be so down for that, Jeremy. It is very, very frustrating that everything is criminalized and they're just trying to add some more on top of it. It's already a crime. They've already been charged with crimes. We all understand this, right? All of the people who were involved at the Capitol Hill riots, at least 300 of them, according to their own numbers, they have already been charged with crimes. So why do we need to classify them and categorize them as domestic terrorists? What does that do? It is going to morph into something else. It's going to morph into a removal of rights to firearms. It's going to morph into certain surveillance limitations or extensions. We'll see, but I don't like it. It's not good.